Welcome back, everyone. We were talking about the barriers to developing autonomy, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the advantages. Definitely promoting autonomy can contribute to the capacity of acting as responsible members of society, something that seems to be very necessary nowadays. To promote the development of fully functioning individuals, to allow students to develop their full potential. To recognize the importance of the capacity of self as well as the potential of interdependence. Both also very interesting concepts, because it's the idea of being capable on my own, but also being able to recognize that I need others and that others need me. To contribute to the development of critical thinking and the capacity for making decisions, taking into account diverse viewpoints, also vital in today's information society, where we have a lot of information but we just don't know what to do with it. To make the most of limited resources and help overcome restraints that we've already talked about, and certainly to promote motivation and engagement, which we know are vital to learning and especially to language learning, as we'll see further ahead. But it's easy to see how students who have freedom of choice, who can make decisions, who can be more actively engaged in their learning process, will actually, of course, be more self-motivated and willing to work harder. So it would seem to make sense to promote autonomy. Now let's talk a little bit about collaboration and cooperation. When we talk about autonomy and independence, we've been saying that it's really hard to envision teaching without taking into account that we are social beings, constantly in interaction with others. And on the other hand, not accepting that knowledge is co-constructed, that we gain more meaning and it makes more sense to learn when we can interact with others, when we can build something with others, and we can negotiate meaning. And in that process, we're all learning much more. Undoubtedly, that creates more meaningful and more lasting learning than just absorbing passively information that is given to me. Panet says that collaboration is a philosophy of interaction and personal lifestyle where individuals are responsible for their actions, including learning, and respect the abilities and contributions of their peers. He proposes something that other theorists don't necessarily agree with, that collaboration is more of a lifestyle, right? A kind of way of looking at learning and other actions in our lives, in which we are responsible for our actions, and I would say also responsible to a certain extent for the actions of others, because what I contribute to others is as important as what they contribute to me. In that sense, Johnson & Johnson, when they refer to cooperation, talk about working together to accomplish shared goals. Within cooperative situations, individuals seek outcomes that are beneficial to themselves and beneficial to all other group members. Cooperative learning is the instructional use of small groups so that students work together to maximize their own and each other's learning. So it's not just working together, which is something students love, and many adults as well, but it's working together to learn from each other and to learn more from that interaction than what we would learn on our own. So this is something to take into account when we consider our contexts with very large groups. Working in cooperation or collaboration can actually help us to overcome, in a certain sense, that barrier, and also to contribute to better language learning. Students have more opportunities to interact and to use the language than when the teacher is directing the whole class activity, which is also very important, or lecturing, which is also very valid, but actually doesn't allow students to use the language meaningfully for longer periods of time, which is, again, something that we know needs to happen for language learning to be effective. And finally, we've been talking about motivation, and definitely motivation is a very, very important factor in all kinds of learning, especially language learning. If we look at Dornier's definition, motivation can be seen as the initial energy source that fuels subsequent behavioral trajectories toward particular outcomes. Now, this is very, very important because if I'm not motivated to learn, it's really difficult to learn. And we have, as language teachers, an additional barrier. Because, of course, students may learn things that they're not terribly interested in their own languages, because there's not an additional obstacle to that learning. For example, if we're asked to learn something which may initially not be terribly interesting to us, but we're learning it in English or in Spanish, it's not very, very difficult, right? Because we can access that knowledge and take whatever we need to from the sources that we're looking at. However, if we were asked to learn something new in Russian, let's say we want to learn how to make a new recipe, but all the literature is in Russian, then we have, as I'm stating, two obstacles. It's learning the new content, but also learning the language that will allow me to learn the new context. So motivation becomes very, very important in language learning. And on top of that, Dornier and his colleagues have proposed a new concept, which is directed motivational currents, in which motivation is viewed not simply as a springboard for action, but also as a uniquely self-renewing and sustainable process. It is this energizing capacity which distinguishes DMCs, directed motivational currents, from almost every other motivational construct described in the research literature. And now this is very, very interesting from the point of view of language teaching, because I'm sure we've all heard the stories of people who have gone out to buy language teaching programs, software, or on an impulse that they want to learn a language, right? And I'm sure that many of those are still gathering dust in somebody's home, because it's very, very frequent. You have that impulse, and I think the clearest example is gym memberships. At the beginning of the year, after having all those wonderful meals over the holiday season, we decide that it's time to get back in shape, and we want to take care of ourselves and have better health, better nutritional habits, and so we're going to start a diet and we're going to join the gym. And so we buy the membership for a year, we use it for 2 months, and then life settles back to normal and we forget all about that, or we just can't. It's impossible to do it. So we lose that initial impulse. And I think what Dornier is proposing here is that motivation can't just be that, as he puts it, a springboard, but more of a continued self-renewing and sustainable process, because we all know that language learning is a process, and it's a long process. It takes several years to become fully competent in a language. Therefore, if we want to make sure that our students will be learning, we really have to tap into this idea of continued motivation that will ensure that they will go beyond the initial impulse of, oh, this sounds fun, this sounds interesting, I'm going to need this for my career, but no, it's too difficult, it takes too much time, I'm not going to be doing that. So we know of people who start level 1 of English many, many, many times, and it's not that the teaching is not appropriate, it's not that the student is not a good learner, but if you don't practice it, if you don't sustain that practice, then you're just not going to learn the language. You're practically, every time you start level 1, you're almost starting from 0 again, because you've forgotten what you learned in that level 1 4 years ago or 10 years ago when you first had that motivation to start. And I'm sure that you all have many, many examples that will show how very important motivation is in learning in general, but as I say, specifically in language learning, because of its specific characteristics, because we feel so vulnerable when we're learning a new language, that if people are not motivated, it can't sustain that motivation. And of course, although the motivation is intrinsic, there are many things in the environment, in a dynamic, positive teacher, in strategies that are varied and that tap into my learning styles, my needs, the way I like to learn, into using different kinds of resources, being able to work with my friends and my peers to construct things. All of those things definitely fuel a motivation that hopefully will be sustained and will allow me to learn the language over time and to learn it and not forget it. So definitely motivation is a very, very important factor. So what to do? Because we've talked a lot about different theories and terms and concepts, but okay, so I'm starting a new year and I have students in class. What should I do? I think the one very important thing that one needs to do is to bridge that gap between theory and practice that David Perkins talks about. You're all trying to do that through a master's program, but sometimes it becomes so easy to become theoretical, and I use communicative language teaching, and I do task-based learning, and I do project-based learning or problem-based learning, and I'm aware of students' learning styles and their needs, and so I do some differentiation, and I'm really hooked on technology, so I have students use their phones, or I go to the computer lab to be able to access different resources. I talk about a lot of these things, but do I actually put them into practice? Can I put them into practice when, well, I'm given, like many teachers, a curriculum that I have to follow, and I can't be too creative because then I'm not going to cover all of the topics that I need to cover with my students. Or I'm very scared that they will learn mistakes from others, so I never put them into groups to work. So we talk about the theory, we talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk. We don't actually put that into practice and try to narrow that gap between what I believe, what I say I believe, and what actually happens in my classroom, and what my students perceive of what happens in the classroom, because those actually might turn out to be very, very different things, and part of what we want to do with this course is bring them all together. Another thing is to view proposals and theory critically, because sometimes, oh wow, the latest theory, communicative language teaching, and we don't actually know what it means, and we don't look at it critically, nor do we see if it's adaptable to our reality. We have to look at different sides in the debates, not just what some people propose, but what perhaps the opposite points of view as well, so that actually we can move forward in developing our own teaching philosophy, which resonates with things we believe in and the way we teach and the way we see our students learning and things that work for us. Sometimes we just go day to day following the school curriculum, the set curriculum, and we don't really ask ourselves what we believe in. And then we have to take the next step, which is the most important one, which is to make our practice a reflection of and feedback of to our own teaching philosophies. That is, what I believe in actually happens in the classroom. It can be seen, it's visible, and it also informs and transforms my teaching philosophy as I see, oh wow, I did this, but this really would have worked better, right? So that's what has to happen, and that's what we're trying to achieve through the master's program and this course. I'd like to end with a couple of quotes. Education is really aimed at helping students get to the point where they can learn on their own. And from a blog, I strongly believe that it's our duty as teachers to empower our students with strategies and skills they need in order to become better and more autonomous learners. Our job is to help them grow and thrive and to encourage them all the way. So we want to help them become autonomous, independent, self-directed, but our presence is absolutely vital for this to happen. So perhaps autonomy is the aim of education. What do you think?